I'm a humanitarian. I am an archivist of Black history, but of all things, I'm a Black girl fanatic, and I'm so honored to be able to, step into my power and live in purpose on purpose and allow my legacy to shine bright while I am here. My phrase in life right now is, I'm not here to waste my grandmother's prayers. And it's all about doing this restorative justice work within myself, about going past my fears and owning the destiny that is meant for me, because we cannot allow time to make us think that we have much of it, right? Because we don't know, and COVID taught us that. We have to step into our power, whether people talk mess about us or not. And with that, in 2018, I decided to shift gears on people, but step into the destiny that was already planned for me and step into entertainment. And, live this life as an actor and a producer and a director, with the heart in mind to be a social justice activist, right? That's what this entertainment lens does for me personally, and that's what I'm able to give to the world. So that's what I do, and that's who I am.
That the BIPOC Adult Industry Collective. And what's really important about what we do is that we support sex workers. And their sex workers need so much support in so many different ways. And the number one thing that sex workers need is to no longer, receive shame, because so many people just want to just say, oh, well, they want to make these judgment calls about what it means to be a sex worker, but they don't actually know any sex workers. They've never had any conversations. And it goes back to what I was saying about, if you feel like you can't be friends with or have a conversation with a group of people, then you tend to not view them as people. Mm-hmm. And you tend to not, advocate for them in ways that they need, not in ways that you think. Because I don't know any sex workers that are asking to be saved.
There's first a lot of desire for us to show up as the example that we model for adults. There's a lot that we have learned as adult entertainers, educators, and just, adult human beings, sexual adult human beings, that we have felt that if we had some different experiences as children, we would have aced this thing as adults a lot sooner, right? And then it's also important for me to take any and all opportunities to present this work to different audiences, because sex workers, and I would go as far as to say sex educators and sex therapists, have a really difficult time being stigmatized by the general public with relationship to, can we parent well?
So colorism is a system, it's a structure, a social structure of both privilege and marginalization. And the system places greater value on lighter skin tones, as well as more European phenotypes. So when I say phenotype, I mean any of the physical features that we typically associate with a particular race.
I'm a fibroid survivor, and I remember my family ignoring me telling them about my symptoms, about hey, my period is intense. And all they say is, oh, your auntie had a bad period, moving on. And you're like, okay, that's good for auntie, but what about me? I'm going through it, right? And I remember when I was 22, all my friends were on birth control. So I was like, maybe I'm missing out. Let me get on birth control like the big girls, right? So I get on birth control, and my fibroids just, one of my clinicians say, it's like they're at hometown buffet. They're just living their best life. They're growing because fibroids are based on, they feed off of hormones and sugar. And what is birth control? Synthetic hormones. And we already have our natural hormones, but then there's synthetic hormones. And then, certain foods that we eat are infused with even more hormones. So She was like, right now, your fibroids are doing a thing.
My doctor that performed my vasectomy actually performed his own vasectomy. And that's when I knew, I was like, yeah, that's the guy I want. but it was a painless procedure. The only piece of it that did have some pain was initially when they were, putting in they were anesthetizing the area. Other than that, the recovery was pretty quick. I feel fine after the fact. I'm happy to answer any specific questions anyone has about a vasectomy, but I bring this up specifically on today because they're, short of buying yourself a Supreme Court seat, then there's not much that can be done to change the laws in this country. Okay. However, as an individual,
on the continent of Africa and Asia, for example, they have had color prejudices even before Europeans came and instilled the delusion of white supremacy. But it's most commonly known in Asian countries as caste, right? Or where there's a correlation to the lower castes being darker skinned and people with higher caste or even aristocracy, monarchy. We think about even ancient Egypt, right? Where the ruling classes were associated with people who tended to have lighter skin tones. But I do say too, and I'm not a historian, I'm an expert in colorism, but I don't know all the nuances of ancient Egypt or, whatever. But there is something about colonialism that entrenched colorism in a way that it never was before, right? So while I acknowledge that before European colonialism, certain cultures had a practice where darker skinned people were in the lower caste of that society, but there's something different about it. It has a different tone now that we're talking about European colonialism. I was gonna say European colorism, which is basically the same thing.
And I think because people sexualize us to the nth degree, and part of sexualizing us for some reason, that means that you can't have these other things. There's also this idea that I cannot be an appropriate parent.
Right.
Or that somehow because I've made the decision to do this type of labor with my body, that I cannot make good decisions as a parent. And I think that's totally false. I do see a lot of people that go into sex work to be better parents, to be more present, to be able to make more money, to be more flexible in their hours, to build other businesses that will allow them to continue to be present and offer a certain afford a certain type of lifestyle and luxury to their families. So there's that. And then there's one other piece that I wanted to share about that, as it's slowly slipping from my mind. So I'm going to actually turn it back to you.
Okay. Well, I've totally had that happen more than once. So what you were saying though about the parenting aspect is so incredibly true. From the inside, I have seen people build careers and build lives and shift things for their family and have more time for their family through these professions versus going to work 40 hours a week every single day. And the things that pull you away from your family and don't allow you to be there. So I think it's actually a really excellent point that people often go into sex work to provide better for others.
Open and honest and opening up a space for curiosity. She was just so open. And what I appreciate about her is she always showed me that chocolate girls like myself deserve luxury, deserve good things, deserve to be wanted and worthy and to want nice things. And I think that was one of the biggest things that I got from her. And what I appreciate about that is now I can give that same rhetoric to my daughter, especially in a queer relationship where people are already demonizing, our family. And I'm sure my daughter has experienced a lot of negative commentary about oh, you got two moms. Oh, that's weird, right? Oh, and she's been made fun of in her own way and had to find her own confidence about having queer parents. And we've had to move forward in our family, even when families weren't supportive of us, right? So
mention concepts of hotness. So based on societal norms, is everyone there fit in 100% with societal normativity of being attractive? And I know that there are some groups and communities, whatnot, that actually have weight limits, height limits, skin tone limits,
Nah,
Like all this stuff where it's like, you can't come to this event unless you fit into all of these parameters.
right.
And only people who fit into those parameters if belong in that club. So now I think you've got something that is specifically around objectification and the expectation of sex, which is not in any way the same as a play party. You know, like you said, sex is not a requisite.
Yeah, and for anyone who's never been to a play party and they're looking to decide which one may be their first one, I would recommend looking at, what would gain access to that play party. So if they have some of those stipulations, like you mentioned, like weight limits and all this other nonsense, then no, dip, period. But because what they should be looking at is, okay, what kind of person are you?
Right.
Okay. Are you a shitty person who won't hear someone's no? Or, do you weigh a certain amount? One of those is way more important. Okay. Period.
Part of that eradication of Blackness, people also have a form of like bleaching through their offspring. So their mating choices, who they choose to partner with, who they choose to bear children with, is sort of like a generational bleaching. And there's in the Latin American culture, Central and South America, there's something called mejorando la raza, bettering the race, or blanqueamiento la raza, right? So whitening the race. And so it's, you're not using physical creams on your own skin, but through strategic partnering and, practices of reproduction, you ensure that the generations after you get closer and closer to that European standard. So that is.
No, that's absolutely perfect, because that was my next question. Like, how does this show up in non-Black communities? And I'm like, yes. Everybody wants to be complimented, and it's like, that's like saying everyone wants to be objectified.
Right. And that's a big challenge for me, is because it's like, objectification is something that you want consent for. And when I say you want consent, I don't mean you should go and ask people, hey, can I objectify you? Because while I've certainly received that question, that's totally fine to receive that question in an intimate setting, because I've been in a situation where I'm one-on-one with someone and they'll say, hey, is it okay if I objectify you for a minute? And then they fill in the blanks after that. But a lot of people, I've seen people do this thing where they're like, oh, I figured it out, fellas. All we got to do is say, hey, may I give you a compliment? And it's like, no, because now you're just looking for a workaround.
Right.
And it's like, that's also not the move. The thing is, if you don't know this person and you're not giving a compliment from a genuine place, and here's what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
If I know that someone has, let's say that they've been trying to grow their hair and they wanted to like get really long hair or something like that, and then I haven't seen them in like a year, and then their hair growth is looking really good, then I may say, hey, your hair looks good. And here's something I want to point out as well. I will say your hair looks good instead of I like your hair, because one of those is about me and the other one is about that person and their hair.
Wow.
Like critical race theory as well right now, about history being revised and information being taken out of schools, but it was barely there to begin with. So we already have the experience of what it's like not being represented in education. And what that means, it means that we have to double down and educate our children at home and put them in the places and spaces within community where they can get that kind of discourse, the exposure to information. For those of us that have been a part of the LGBTQIA community, I mean, there hasn't been a time where that type of education has been made available to our children. So what have we had to do? Build community and expose our children in a way that is, healthy and age appropriate and comprehensive for them in that way. So I do think that those parents who are just like, we're relying on the school system to be there for them in terms of sex education, health and wellness, you're going to have to take a page from other stigmatized communities book where we do it ourselves, or we rely on other people in our tribe to do that. We also, have seen them take away art and music,
Right.
physical
Right.
education. Like we've seen this model before and we know it doesn't work, right? Where children need something and they need it in a structured way at a particular time and presented in a particular way. And we've seen it taken away and the outcomes that it's had. And those communities that have done the best in this case, in these type of scenarios, have provided supplemental education, supplemental experiences for those children. So, you know, it's scary, it's very frustrating, it's very as the person said, but we can rely on other models where we have to be the ones to offer it to our children, because we cannot rely on our government to see it as important, useful, or see our children as worth having this.
Part of that eradication of Blackness, people also have a form of like bleaching through their offspring. So their mating choices, who they choose to partner with, who they choose to bear children with, is sort of like a generational bleaching. And there's in the Latin American culture, Central and South America, there's something called mejorando la raza, bettering the race, or blanqueamiento la raza, right? So whitening the race. And so it's, you know, you're not using physical creams on your own skin, but through strategic partnering and, you know, practices of reproduction, you ensure that the generations after you get closer and closer to that European standard. So that is.
Yes. No, that's absolutely perfect, because that was my next question. Like, how does this show up in non-Black communities? And I'm like, yes.
Very so.
Yeah. And it shows up, you know, like they have a phrase for it, but I've seen it, you know, I've seen it inside my own family. I've seen it in my life. You talked about like thinner noses. And when I was a kid, my mom was like, if you pinch your nose like this, like it'll eventually reshape itself. And I was like, why am I hurting my face?
Right. People would put clothespins on babies' noses, you know? Yeah, clothespins, like walk around with that. And it's there's an interesting article too about like Afro-Brazilian families, because so Latinx is an ethnicity, it's not a race. And so a part of the confusion with all of these conversations is the slippage of these terms like nationality versus ethnicity versus race, and the fact that those are not interchangeable, even though we use them interchangeably, and people, that confuses people. So when we say Latinx, people assume that that's separate and apart from Black. And there's a lot of anti-Blackness in Latinx communities. And so a lot of Latinx people of African descent throughout the generations have chosen not to identify as Black, right? And so there's this sort of intentional suppression of the African ancestry of so many Latinx people, so many people who have been in Central and South America for generations, since the slave trade, right? Since their ancestors arrived there on slave ships. But I think we're seeing a resurgence of that now in other places in the diaspora too, like in Germany, right? Like people are starting to identify as Afro-German, for example, whereas before it was shameful. It was like something you wanted to run away from, like not wanting to acknowledge that there's African ancestry there.
It's absolutely true. And what you find is that Black youth have always been the catalyst for change. Anytime something was just like not right, it usually was a Black teenager standing up, getting all their friends and saying, we should do something about this. That is what empowered their parents, their grandparents. It's usually our Black youth. And today we see the same thing globally. When Black youth are like, this is cool, this is bad, this is right, this is fucked up, the world then follows suit, right? And so it's up to us to empower our Black youth to be educated about their agency and their power, because they are not only the future, they are the right now.
Right.
They are the right now.